My name is Skylar and I'm 31 years old. Most people see me as just another tech worker, but few know I've built a company worth millions. My parents, both prestigious educators, always valued degrees over actual success. They never understood how I could thrive without following their prescribed path. Last month, everything came to a head at our family dinner. The harsh words still echo in my mind: uneducated trash and lowlife. They had no idea about my $20 million net worth. While I share how my own family rejected me before learning what I'd achieved, let me know where you're watching from and hit subscribe if you've ever felt underestimated by those who should believe in you most. I grew up in a middle-class suburban home in Michigan where academic achievements were the currency of success. My father, James, held a prestigious position as a university professor in economics, complete with elbow patches on his tweed jackets and a study lined with books he'd actually read. My mother, Diane, was equally impressive as the principal of the local high school, known for her strict policies and high standards that pushed students toward academic excellence. From my earliest memories, dinner conversations revolved around scholarly pursuits, academic journals, and the latest research methodologies. My parents hosted dinner parties where professors and educators would debate theories while sipping wine and nodding sagely at each other. In this world, your worth was measured by the degrees hanging on your wall and the institutions that had granted them. I was the anomaly in this perfectly curated academic family portrait. While I was undeniably intelligent, my brain simply worked differently. I learnt through doing, creating, and problem-solving in real time. Sitting still for lectures was my personal form of torture. My fingers itched to build to code to create something tangible rather than memorize facts for tests. "Skylar, why can't you apply yourself like your cousins?" my mother would ask after each disappointing report card. Madison is already taking advanced placement courses, and Jeremy has been accepted to 3 Ivy League schools. The comparisons were constant and crushing. During family gatherings, my achievements were glossed over, while my cousins' academic accomplishments were celebrated with cake and champagne. When I built my first basic website at 14, my father glanced at it and said, "That's nice, dear, but shouldn't you be studying for your history exam?" The website was forgotten, but my C- on the history test was taped to the refrigerator as a reminder of my failure. What my parents didn't know, or perhaps chose to ignore, was that I struggled with undiagnosed dyslexia. Words would swim on pages, numbers would transpose themselves, and test time limits were my nemesis. I developed elaborate coping mechanisms, but never told my parents. Their disappointment was already heavy enough without adding what they might see as another deficiency. During high school, while maintaining just enough academic performance to avoid complete parental meltdown, I secretly taught myself coding. Late at night, after finishing homework that took me twice as long as it should have, I would dive into programming tutorials online. The logical structure of code made sense to me in a way that Shakespearean analysis never did. I found forums and online communities where skills mattered more than grades, where people appreciated my ability to solve problems creatively. High school graduation was a battle to the very end. I barely made it across the stage, my GPA just high enough to earn my diploma. While my classmates celebrated with parties and gifts, my parents sat me down for the talk. "We've researched some community colleges that might accept someone with your academic record," my father said, sliding brochures across the table. "After a year or two, if you apply yourself, perhaps you could transfer to a real university. We've always expected you to get a degree, Skylar," my mother added. "Everyone in this family has at least a master's. It's simply what we do." The college application season was devastating. I applied to a few schools to appease my parents, but was rejected from all the ones they deemed acceptable. My SAT scores were mediocre at best. My essay was apparently lacking scholarly ambition, and my extracurriculars focused on independent tech projects, rather than the debate team or model UN. When I suggested taking a gap year to work in technology, my father exploded. "No daughter of mine is going to waste her life as a computer technician. You need a degree to be taken seriously in this world." My mother was more tactical but equally dismissive. "Darling, without proper education, you'll hit a ceiling so quickly. Do you want to be stuck in entry-level positions forever?" Their ultimatum came on a rainy Sunday evening: go to college, any college they approved of, or move out. They thought they were motivating me using tough love to push me toward what they believed was the only path to success. They couldn't see that they were actually pushing me toward my true calling, just not in the way they intended. I chose to leave. With $800 in savings from my part-time job at the local computer repair shop, I found the smallest, most affordable apartment in a somewhat questionable part of town. My parents helped me move in silence, my mother occasionally sighing dramatically as she looked around the tiny space. "You can always come home when you're ready to be sensible," were my father's parting words as they left me alone in my new life at 19 years old. My first real job was at the bottom rung of a small software company, answering customer service calls about frozen screens and forgotten passwords. The pay was minimal, but it covered rent and ramen with just enough left over for the occasional treat of actual fresh vegetables. "Have you tried turning it off and on again?" so became my daily mantra. The job itself was mind-numbing, but it gave me proximity to what I really wanted. After hours, a few kind developers took me under their wing, answering my questions and pointing me toward resources to improve my coding skills. Jackson, a senior developer with wild hair and a coffee addiction, would look over my shoulder at my attempts to build simple applications. "Your approach is unusual," he'd say, "but it works. You think differently. That's valuable." Those words were like water in a desert after years of being told my different way of thinking was a liability. I started staying late every day, absorbing knowledge like a sponge. While my peers went out for drinks, I was debugging practice projects and learning new programming languages. My relationship with my parents devolved into obligatory monthly dinners where they would interrogate me about my plans to return to education, and I would deflect with vague answers about building experience. Customer service isn't a career, Skylar. My mother would remind me over her perfectly cooked pot roast. At your age, I was already finishing my master's degree. What I couldn't tell them was that I was already working on my first real app, a tool that helped small businesses manage their inventory more efficiently than the expensive enterprise solutions on the market. I coded in the early mornings before work and late into the night after my shifts. My tiny apartment became a workshop of sticky notes, energy drink cans, and notebooks filled with ideas and solutions. Living paycheck to paycheck was a constant stress. One unexpected expense could derail everything, a fact my parents never tired of pointing out. "This is why education matters," my father would lecture. "Security comes from credentials, not hourly wage jobs." The turning point came when I helped a customer with a particularly tricky software issue. Gabriela Martinez, the CTO of a promising startup, was so impressed with my troubleshooting that she asked about my background. Self-taught. I admitted, expecting the usual dismissal. Instead, she raised an eyebrow and said, "Show me what you can do." I nervously showed her my inventory app, still in development, but functional. She explored it for several minutes in silence while I tried not to fidget. "This is genuinely innovative," she finally said. "Would you consider coming to work for me? We need someone who thinks outside the box." The offer she made was both terrifying and exhilarating. The salary was barely more than what I was making in customer service, but the position would put me directly in the development team, the catch I would need to leave my secure, if boring, position and jump into the uncertain world of startups. When I told my parents about the opportunity over our next monthly dinner, their reaction was predictable. "Startups are just fancy unemployment," my father scoffed. 90% fail within the first year. "And what happens when it does fail?" my mother added. "You'll have wasted more time that could have been spent getting proper education." I took the job anyway. Working with Gabriela was like finally finding someone who spoke my language. She recognized my dyslexia almost immediately, not as a flaw, but as part of what made my problem-solving unique. Under her mentorship, my skills grew exponentially. The financial struggle intensified at first. The startup operated on thin margins, and there were weeks when I slept on the office couch to save on electricity at my apartment. Ramen became both breakfast and dinner. I picked up freelance coding gigs on weekends to make ends meet. My parents interpreted my exhaustion at our monthly dinners as evidence of my impending failure. "You look terrible," my mother would observe. "College students pull all-nighters too, but at least they get a degree at the end of it." The difference was that I could see the light at the end of the tunnel. Our startup was developing a revolutionary app that helped connect independent healthcare providers with patients. The concept was gaining traction, and after 18 months of grueling work, we caught the attention of a Silicon Valley investor. When I tried to share this exciting development with my parents, my father waved his hand dismissively. "A lucky break perhaps, but without credentials, you'll always be replaceable." Yay. What they couldn't see was that our lucky break was the result of thousands of hours of dedicated work, innovative thinking, and perseverance. The investor saw what my parents couldn't potential beyond any degree. Over the next 2 years, our startup grew from 5 people working in a cramped office to 30 employees in a real commercial space. My role expanded from developer to lead architect of our platform. For the first time, I wasn't just surviving, I was beginning to thrive. The day our startup was acquired by a major tech company ranks among the most surreal experiences of my life. After 3 years of non-stop work, 16-hour days, and countless moments of doubt, we had created something valuable enough that a tech giant wanted to buy it for millions. My share of the acquisition money came to just over $3 million. At 26 years old, I went from counting pennies for ramen to having more money than I knew what to do with. The sensation was dizzying, exhilarating, and terrifying all at once. Strangely, my first instinct wasn't to buy a sports car or a mansion. It was to keep the money absolutely secret, especially from my family. Years of dismissal and criticism had trained me to expect that no achievement would ever be enough. I worried that if my parents knew about my financial success, they would either take credit for it somehow or find new ways to diminish it. They'll just say I got lucky, I told Gabriella over celebration drinks, or that I could have made even more with a proper education. She understood completely. Your success is yours, Skylar. You decide who gets to share in it. So I made a decision that surprised everyone who knew about my windfall. I continued living modestly. I upgraded from my tiny apartment to a slightly larger one, bought a reliable but unassuming car, and invested the bulk of my money back into the technology sector I understood so well. More importantly, I started my own company. Using my experience and new connections, I assembled a team of brilliant developers who, like me, were valued for their skills rather than their credentials. We focused on creating advanced security software that protected user data in revolutionary ways. The next few years were a whirlwind of growth. My new company expanded rapidly, our security solutions were adopted by major platforms, and my personal net worth grew to over $20 million by the time I turned 31. Industry insiders knew of our success, but we maintained a relatively low profile in the broader tech world, focusing on excellence rather than publicity. Throughout this period, my relationship with my family remained strained and distant. During monthly dinners, which I still attended out of some stubborn hope for reconciliation, they continued to treat me like their struggling, underachieving daughter. Allison's son just finished his PhD at Princeton, my mother mentioned during one such dinner, and he's only 29. He already has tenure-track offers from 3 universities. My father would chime in with his usual refrain. It's never too late to go back to school, Skylar. Even with your limited academic record, there are programs that might accept you. I would smile and nod, sharing vague details about work going well and interesting projects, while they exchanged knowing glances that screamed, she's in denial about her failure. What they didn't know was that I had purchased a stunning beach house in Florida, a private sanctuary where I could escape Michigan winters and family judgment. The property had 5 bedrooms, floor-to-ceiling windows facing the ocean, and a private stretch of beach. It was my true home while I maintained the modest Michigan apartment purely for these family visits. As my company continued to succeed, I found myself increasingly comfortable with my non-traditional path. The validation from the market, from my peers, and from my bank account gradually outweighed the persistent voice in my head that echoed my parents' criticisms. I built friendships with other entrepreneurs who valued creativity and results over credentials. After one particularly condescending family dinner during which my cousin Brandon proudly announced his acceptance to Harvard Business School to unanimous family acclaim, I made a decision. It was time to finally reveal my success to my parents. Not to gloat or seek revenge, but to free myself from the burden of their misconceptions and perhaps, just perhaps, to finally earn their respect. I spent weeks preparing for this revelation. I created a simple presentation about my company, compiled press mentions and client testimonials, and rehearsed a calm, non-confrontational way to share my journey. I wanted to show them that there were many paths to success, that my different way of thinking had been an asset rather than a liability. The plan was to share everything at our next monthly dinner. I even bought a new outfit for the occasion, something professional but not flashy. I practiced in front of the mirror, keeping my voice steady when I imagined their reactions. Mum, Dad, I have something important to share with you. I rehearsed. I know you've been concerned about my career choices, but I want to show you what I've built. I allowed myself to hope that this would be a turning point, that they might finally see me clearly for the first time in years. With a mix of anxiety and optimism, I looked forward to our upcoming dinner, unaware of just how dramatically it would alter the course of our relationship. The evening of our monthly family dinner arrived with an unusual spring thunderstorm. I pulled up to my parents' colonial-style home in my deliberately modest Toyota, taking a deep breath before grabbing my portfolio and tablet. Inside was all the evidence of my success neatly organized and professionally presented. "You're late," my mother greeted me at the door, checking her watch pointedly. "Dinner's getting cold." The table was set with the good china, which meant someone important was being celebrated. It didn't take long to discover who. "Your cousin Jennifer just received a full scholarship to Yale Medical School," my father announced as he served the roast chicken. "Full ride. The family is absolutely thrilled." "That's wonderful," I replied automatically. The script of these dinners so familiar I could recite my lines without thinking. For the next 30 minutes, I listened to detailed accounts of Jennifer's accomplishments, her research proposals, and speculation about which medical specialty she would choose. My mother had already spoken with her parents about proper housing near campus and the networking opportunities available. "Academia opens so many doors," my father said, pointedly glancing my way. "The connections alone are worth the investment." I saw my opening and took it. Speaking of professional connections, I've actually been meaning to tell you about my work. Things have been going really well with my company. My mother's smile was indulgent, but dismissive. "Oh, still with that little startup." "Actually, I founded my own company a few years ago," I explained, pulling out my tablet. "We develop advanced security software that's now used by several major tech platforms." I opened our company website, which featured our impressive client list and industry awards. My father barely glanced at it before interrupting. "Skylar, while I'm sure your little computer job keeps you busy, we're discussing Jennifer's academic achievement. Let's stay on topic." I tried again more directly this time. "Dad, Mum, I really want you to understand what I've built. My company has revolutionized data protection across multiple industries. We've grown exponentially over the past 3 years." My mother sighed and placed her fork down. "Darling, it's wonderful that you have a job you enjoy, but real success requires credentials, peer review, institutional backing. Without proper education, there's only so far you can go." "That's not actually true," I said, feeling my carefully rehearsed speech slipping away as frustration mounted. Some of the most successful tech innovators didn't complete traditional education paths. "Those are outliers and exceptions," my father scoffed. "For every Bill Gates, there are thousands of dropouts working retail. Is that really the gamble you want to make with your life?" I pulled out my portfolio, determined to make them see. "I'd like to show you some actual numbers. My company's valuation—" "Enough, Skylar." My father interrupted, his voice sharp. "This desperate attempt to justify your choices is embarrassing. Jennifer has achieved more academic recognition in 1 year than you have in your entire life." I felt my cheeks burn but pressed on. "If you would just look at these figures." "Figures can be manipulated," my mother interjected. "Anyone can create an impressive-looking presentation. The truth is, without proper credentials, you're just playing at success." The conversation was spiraling away from the calm, rational discussion I had planned. Their absolute refusal to even look at the evidence of my success was more painful than I had anticipated. "You know what your problem is?" my father said, his voice rising. "You've always taken shortcuts, always looked for the easy way out. That's not how real achievement works." "My way wasn't easy," I said quietly, fighting to keep my voice steady. "It was just different." "Different?" My father laughed coldly. "Let's call it what it is. Compared to the rest of this family, you're just uneducated trash. A disappointment we've had to explain away at faculty functions and family gatherings for years." The words hit like physical blows. Uneducated trash. I'd prepared for skepticism, for dismissal, even for arguments, but not for this level of contempt. My mother didn't contradict him. Instead, she added her own cutting remark. "We raised you for better than this mediocrity, Skylar. Do you know how it feels to have colleagues ask about our daughter and have nothing impressive to share? No degree, no academic achievements, just some vague tech job." I sat in stunned silence, the portfolio of my company's success lying untouched on the table between us. All the preparation, all the hope that they might finally see me, clearly evaporated in an instant. "I'm not a disappointment," I finally said, my voice barely above a whisper. "And what I do isn't mediocre. If you would just look." My father stood abruptly, his chair scraping loudly against the hardwood floor. His face had turned an alarming shade of red. "Get out, you lowlife," he bellowed, pointing toward the door. "I'm tired of your excuses and your delusions of adequacy. You made your choice when you rejected education, and you've been failing ever since." My mother remained seated but nodded in agreement. "Don't come back until you've made something of yourself, something real with credentials we can actually be proud of." In that moment, something broke inside me, but something else crystallized into perfect clarity. There would never be a presentation compelling enough, an achievement significant enough, or success undeniable enough to change their perception. Their measuring stick was fixed, and I would always fall short. With surprising calmness, I gathered my untouched portfolio and tablet, placing them back in my bag. I didn't cry, didn't argue, didn't try to defend myself further. What would be the point? "Okay," I said simply. "If that's how you feel." I walked out of their dining room, through the front door, and to my car, aware of their eyes watching me from the window. They probably expected me to break down, to come crawling back with apologies and promises to finally conform to their expectations. Instead, I drove away with the strange, sad realization that they had no idea who I really was or what I had achieved. They saw only the absence of what they valued, never the presence of what I had built. And for the first time, I understood that their inability to see my worth wasn't my failure, but theirs. The moment I closed my car door, the careful composure I had maintained in front of my parents shattered. Tears streamed down my face as I gripped the steering wheel, their words echoing in my head with brutal clarity. Uneducated trash. Lowlife. Mediocre. The people who should have been my biggest supporters had become my most painful critics. I didn't drive home immediately. Instead, I found myself parked at a scenic overlook above the city, watching as lights flickered on across the Michigan landscape as evening deepened. The irony wasn't lost on me. From this vantage point, I could see the university where my father taught the physical embodiment of the credentials he valued above all else. What now? I whispered to myself, wiping tears with the back of my hand. The answer came with surprising clarity. I needed distance. Physical, emotional, and psychological distance from the constant judgment and dismissal. My modest Michigan apartment had never really been home. It was just a prop in the performance I put on for my family, a visual reinforcement of their narrative about my life. I checked into a hotel that night, unwilling to return to an apartment filled with the echoes of failure my parents had projected onto me. In my hotel room, I made calls to set things in motion, contacting a property management company to handle the lease termination and packing of my apartment, booking a flight to Florida for the next morning, and emailing my assistant that I would be working remotely from my beach house indefinitely. The next day, I boarded a flight with just 2 suitcases of essentials. Everything else could be replaced or shipped later. As the plane took off, I felt the physical distance growing between myself and decades of judgment. By the time we landed in Florida, I was breathing more easily than I had in years. My beach house stood exactly as I had left it 2 weeks earlier. Peaceful, spacious, and mine. Floor-to-ceiling windows showcased the turquoise waters of the Gulf of Mexico, and the sound of waves provided a soothing backdrop that helped quiet the still echoing voices of my parents. The contrast between the spacious, sun-drenched home and the image my parents had of my life was stark. 5 bedrooms each with its own bathroom, a gourmet kitchen with top-of-the-line appliances, a home office with a view that most corporate executives would envy, the private stretch of beach where I could walk barefoot in the sand while taking business calls. "This is my reality," I told myself as I walked through the rooms. Not their perception. Over the next few days, I established new routines. Morning swims in the ocean before conference calls, afternoon strategy sessions from my beachfront patio, evening walks along the shoreline to decompress. The physical activity helped process the emotional turmoil, while the constant sound of waves provided a calming white noise that soothed my still raw nerves. My phone buzzed regularly with notifications from my parents. Voicemails, text messages, emails, all of which I left unanswered. I wasn't ready to engage, not when the wounds were still so fresh. Each message notification brought a wave of anxiety, so after 3 days I blocked their numbers entirely. The silence that followed was healing. Friends who knew my whole story, the handful of people I had allowed to see both my success and my family struggles, checked in regularly. Gabriella, my original mentor, now a close friend, called daily. "They showed you who they are. Skylar," she said during one call. "Believe them, and more importantly, believe in yourself instead." My Florida neighbors, most of whom were successful professionals themselves, became an unexpected support network. unlike in Michigan, where I had deliberately maintained a low profile. Here I allowed myself to be known for who I really was. I accepted dinner invitations, joined the local entrepreneurs group, and gradually built connections that were based on authentic interactions rather than carefully maintained illusions. The decision to permanently relocate to Florida wasn't difficult. I hired a local real estate agent to sell my Michigan apartment and engaged attorneys to handle the paperwork remotely. My company had always been set up for distributed work with team members across multiple time zones, so my location change caused minimal disruption to daily operations. What surprised me most during those first weeks was the profound sense of liberation that came with no longer seeking parental approval. For over a decade, I had maintained the fiction that their validation was still possible, still important. Now faced with the undeniable evidence of their inability to see beyond their own narrow definition of success, I was free to fully inhabit my own achievements without apology or explanation. I redecorated parts of the beach house, replacing the more conservative furnishings I had originally chosen with pieces that better reflected my personality. Bold colors replaced muted tones. The formal dining room was converted into a creative workspace. Art that I genuinely loved replaced appropriate pieces I had selected with my parents' potential approval in mind. As I settled into my authentic life, I found myself casually mentioning my permanent relocation to Florida during calls with extended family members. My grandmother, my father's mother, was particularly interested. Florida. That sounds expensive, dear. Are you sure you can afford it? I'm doing well, Grandma, I replied honestly. My company is successful and I love being near the ocean. She made a non-committal sound, clearly unconvinced, but unwilling to press further. I knew the information would travel through family channels back to my parents. Eventually, another breadcrumb of my reality that they would likely dismiss or reinterpret to fit their narrative. 3 weeks passed in this new rhythm of life. My business continued to thrive. We secured 2 major new clients, and I found myself sleeping better than I had in years. The constant background anxiety of maintaining appearances for my parents was gone, replaced by the simple authenticity of living as myself. I had just returned from an evening beach walk when my assistant called with news that would unexpectedly accelerate the collision between my real life and my parents' perceptions. Skylar, just a heads up, we've been approached by Tech Innovators magazine for a feature story. They're doing a piece on security solutions and want to highlight our company as an industry leader. The opportunity was too good to pass up from a business perspective. The magazine had wide distribution and significant influence in the technology sector. The exposure would be valuable for attracting new clients and talent. Set it up. I agreed, not yet realizing how this decision would ripple outward to irrevocably change my family dynamics. The phone call that changed everything came exactly 3 weeks and 2 days after I had walked out of my parents' house. I was in the middle of a video conference with my development team when my personal cell phone began buzzing incessantly. When it finally went to voicemail, only to immediately ring again, I excused myself to check who was so persistent. The screen showed 14 missed calls from various family members, plus dozens of text messages. My cousin Riley's name flashed as the current caller. Concerned that there might be a family emergency, I stepped away from my meeting to answer. Riley, is everything okay? Skylar? Oh my God, why didn't you tell anyone? We just saw the magazine, $20 million. Your own company, a feature article calling you tech's newest millionaire genius. What the actual hell? My stomach dropped. The Tech Innovators magazine issue had been published apparently with more personal financial details than I had anticipated. The interview had focused on our security innovations, but clearly the writer had done additional research into the company's valuation and my role as founder. Which magazine? I asked, though I already knew the answer. Tech Innovators, you're on the cover, Skylar, in a power suit on a beach looking like some kind of tech mogul, which apparently you actually are. The whole family is freaking out. Aunt Diane and Uncle James had no idea. None of us did. As Riley continued excitedly, I opened my laptop and found the digital version of the magazine. There I was on the cover, photographed on my private beach in a professional outfit, arms crossed confidently, with the headline, Security Revolution, How Skylar Jensen Built a $20 million Empire by Breaking All the Rules. The article detailed my unconventional career path, the acquisition of my first startup, and the subsequent founding of my current company. It positioned me as a visionary who had succeeded specifically because I approached problems differently, highlighting how my neurodivergent thinking had become my greatest strength. Riley, I need to go. We'll talk later. Okay. I ended the call only for the phone to immediately ring again. This time it was my Aunt Susan, my mother's sister, then my Uncle Thomas, then cousins, second cousins, even my grandfather, who barely knew how to use a cell phone. My phone had become a hot potato being passed around the extended family as they all processed their shock. Amidst this chaos, text messages poured in. Most expressed surprise and congratulations, but a few contained screenshots of my parents' social media posts, suddenly and publicly proud of their entrepreneurial daughter and her innovative approach to technology. The same parents who had called me uneducated trash 3 weeks earlier were now attempting to rewrite history, claiming they had always supported Skylar's unique path. The most revealing messages came from my younger brother Adam, the only family member who had maintained a genuine relationship with me over the years. Mum and Dad are in total meltdown mode, he texted. They've been calling everyone trying to get your address in Florida. Dad's telling colleagues he mentored you in business strategy, and Mom's claiming she encouraged your alternative learning style. It's insane. They showed me the article and acted like they'd known about your success all along. Are you okay? I wasn't sure how to answer that question. The validation from the industry recognition was gratifying, but the sudden whiplash of my parents' attitude was both vindicating and deeply painful. Their love and approval appeared to be directly correlated to my perceived status and wealth, not to who I was as a person. For the next several hours, I ignored the barrage of calls and messages, focusing instead on completing my work commitments. By evening, the storm had intensified rather than dissipated. My parents had called 27 times from various numbers after discovering I had blocked them, left voicemails ranging from casual, just checking in, darling, to increasingly desperate, please call us back, we need to talk. My mother's voicemails were particularly jarring in their revisionist history. Skylar, honey, I think there was a terrible misunderstanding at dinner last month. We've always been so proud of your independent spirit, call us back so we can clear this up. By Sashin. My father's messages followed a similar pattern of denial and reframing. I know we've had our differences of opinion about education, but I was just trying to motivate you to reach your full potential. And look, it worked, call us. We have some people we'd like you to meet. Around midnight, after the calls had finally stopped, I received another text from Adam. Heads up, Mum and Dad got your Florida address from Grandma. They're booking flights for this weekend. They're telling everyone they're coming to celebrate your success and reconnect. Just wanted you to know so you're not blindsided. The next morning, a notification from my home security system confirmed Adam's warning my parents had researched, not just my general location, but my exact address. Someone had looked up directions to my beach house, using the precise address, accessing the security camera's external view of the property. I had a decision to make. I could refuse to see them change the security codes and continue the estrangement. Or I could face them directly, establish boundaries, and perhaps find some form of resolution, even if it wasn't the warm reconciliation I had once hoped for. After careful consideration and a long talk with Gabriella, I chose the latter. I would meet them, but on my terms in my space. The home that represented the success they had been unable to see or acknowledge. 3 days later, my security system alerted me to a rental car approaching the gate. Through the camera feed, I watched my parents emerge, looking simultaneously out of place and entitled. My mother had dressed as though for a country club luncheon, while my father wore a blazer despite the Florida heat. They stood at my gate, taking in the scope of the property with expressions I could read, even through the security camera, shock, disbelief, and a calculating reassessment. I took a deep breath and pressed the button to open the gate, preparing myself for one of the most difficult conversations of my life. The electronic gate slid open with a soft mechanical hum, allowing my parents' rental car to proceed up the palm-lined driveway to my beach house. I stood on the front steps watching their approach, feeling strangely calm despite the circumstances. This meeting was happening on my territory, surrounded by the undeniable evidence of my success. Their faces as they stepped out of the car told the entire story. My mother's practiced smile couldn't hide her widened eyes as she took in the expansive oceanfront property. My father's expression shifted rapidly between shock calculation and an attempt at casual nonchalance, as though visiting his daughter's multi-million-dollar beach house was an everyday occurrence. Skylar, darling. My mother approached with arms outstretched, as if our last interaction had been a loving farewell, rather than her silent agreement with my father's cruel dismissal. What a lovely surprise to discover your beautiful home. Why have you been keeping all this success a secret from us? I accepted her embrace without returning it, maintaining a polite but emotional distance. My father approached more cautiously, perhaps sensing that his usual authoritative presence held no power here. "Quite a place you've got," he commented, gesturing toward the house. "Beachfront property in this area must have cost a pretty penny." Instead of responding directly, I simply said, "Please come in," and led them through the front door into the soaring 2-story entryway, with its unobstructed view of the Gulf of Mexico through floor-to-ceiling windows. The interior of my home elicited audible gasps. Modern light-filled and deliberately impressive, it stood in stark contrast to the traditional colonial in Michigan. Original artwork adorned the walls, selected not for status, but because each piece spoke to me personally. The open-concept living area flowed into a gourmet kitchen, and beyond that, the infinity pool seemed to merge with the ocean horizon. "Would you like something to drink?" I offered, maintaining the polite fiction that this was a normal family visit. "Water, coffee, tea." "Perhaps something stronger," my father suggested with a forced chuckle. "This calls for a celebration, doesn't it?" I poured 3 glasses of water instead and guided them to the patio overlooking the beach. The setting was deliberately chosen. The expansive view provided a calming backdrop, while the outdoor setting would prevent voices from echoing if the conversation grew heated. For several minutes, we engaged in the most surreal small talk of my life. They commented on the weather, asked superficial questions about Florida living, and made observations about the decor. Neither mentioned our last encounter, the cruel words spoken, or their sudden change in attitude following the magazine article. Finally, my mother could no longer contain herself. "Skylar, you must tell us everything about your company. The magazine article was fascinating, but surely there's so much more to the story. Why didn't you tell us you were doing so well?" The question hung in the air, so breathtakingly disingenuous that I almost laughed. Instead, I took a slow sip of water and met her gaze directly. "I tried to tell you," I said simply, "many times over many years, including at our last dinner together." My father shifted uncomfortably in his chair. "Well, perhaps we were a bit dismissive at times, but that's only because we wanted what was best for you. We've always believed in your potential." "You called me uneducated trash," I stated flatly, my voice calm but firm. "You told me I was a lowlife and kicked me out of your home." The brutal directness of my statement seemed to physically startle them. My mother's careful smile faltered while my father's face flushed red. "That was a misunderstanding," my mother attempted weakly. "Your father can be passionate when he's concerned about your future. We may have expressed ourselves poorly, but—" "It wasn't poor expression," I interrupted. "It was honest expression. For the first time in years, you both said exactly what you really thought of me and my choices." My father switched tactics, his tone becoming heartier, more congratulatory. "Well, clearly we were wrong about your prospects, and we're big enough to admit that. Look what you've accomplished. We always knew you had it in you, just took a different path than we expected." "You didn't know I had it in me," I corrected him. "You never bothered to actually see what I was building because it didn't fit your narrow definition of success. And now that external validation has forced you to acknowledge my achievements. You're rewriting history to pretend you supported me all along." The facade of their celebratory visit began crumbling rapidly. My mother's smile disappeared, entirely replaced by a look of affronted indignation. "Is that why you brought us here, to throw your success in our faces and make us apologize? That seems rather petty, Skylar." I took another measured breath, determined to maintain my composure. "I didn't bring you here. You invited yourselves after discovering I had money and status. I'm simply refusing to pretend that our last interaction didn't happen." My father leaned forward, adopting the reasonable professor tone he used when delivering lectures. "Families have disagreements, Skylar. Things get said in the heat of the moment. The important thing is moving forward. We're here now, ready to be part of your success." The phrase "part of your success" was telling. Not part of my life, not here to repair our relationship, but to associate themselves with my newly discovered status. "I'm not looking for participants in my success," I said calmly. "I achieved this despite your constant criticism and dismissal. What I wanted, what I've always wanted, was parents who could see and value me for who I actually am, not who you wanted me to be." "We always valued you," my mother insisted, tears beginning to well in her eyes. Whether they were genuine or tactical was impossible to determine. "You valued achievement and credentials," I corrected. "And when you thought I lacked those things, you were perfectly willing to call me trash and cut me out of your lives. That's not love, that's conditional approval. As the conversation continued on the sunlit patio, the careful pretenses fell away entirely. Their initial defensiveness gave way to uncomfortable recognition as I calmly recounted specific instances over the years when they had dismissed, criticized, and devalued my choices and achievements. I spoke without anger, simply stating facts and my experience of their behavior. Gradually, something shifted in their expressions. Perhaps it was the undeniable evidence of my success surrounding us, or perhaps it was simply the calm certainty with which I spoke my truth. But for the first time, they seemed to actually listen. "I didn't know you felt that way," my father eventually said, his voice uncharacteristically subdued. "You never asked," I replied simply. "You were too busy telling me what I should feel, what I should want, what I should do." As the afternoon sun began to lower toward the horizon, painting the Gulf waters in gold and amber, we reached a kind of fragile truce. Not reconciliation, not yet, but at least honest acknowledgement of the damage done and the profound disconnect that had shaped our relationship for years. "So what now?" My mother finally asked a question that contained both challenge and uncertainty. "That depends," I answered truthfully, "on whether you're interested in getting to know who I actually am, not just what I've achieved, and on whether you're willing to build something new instead of pretending the past didn't happen." As they left that evening, returning to their hotel, rather than staying in one of my guest rooms, as they had clearly hoped the boundaries were established, but the door was not completely closed. We agreed to monthly video calls instead of in-person dinners, creating both literal and emotional distance that would allow for a more measured rebuilding of trust if that proved possible. Whether our relationship would ever heal completely remained an open question. But for the first time in my adult life, I was engaging with my parents as an equal, neither seeking their approval nor accepting their judgment as the defining measure of my worth. 6 months after the confrontation with my parents on my beachfront patio, I sit at my desk overlooking the Gulf of Mexico, reflecting on how much has changed. The journey from that painful family dinner in Michigan to where I am today feels both immeasurably long and surprisingly swift. The most profound change hasn't been external, but internal. The weight of seeking parental approval, a burden I carried for decades, has lifted. In its place is something quieter, but infinitely more sustaining self-acceptance, and the validation that comes from living authentically. Our monthly video calls with my parents continue, though they bear little resemblance to our old family dinners. There is more listening than lecturing, now more questions than proclamations. The relationship remains imperfect, sometimes awkward, occasionally tense, but fundamentally more honest than it ever was before. My father still occasionally slips into professor mode, offering unsolicited advice about business strategies he's read about in Harvard Business Review. My mother still mentions cousins' academic achievements, though she's learnt to catch herself mid-sentence with a self-conscious laugh. Old patterns don't disappear overnight. The difference is that now I can smile and gently redirect the conversation rather than absorbing their judgments as reflections of my worth. Their opinions have become just that, opinions, rather than defining verdicts on my life choices. Perhaps the most meaningful action I've taken in these months of healing was establishing the Jensen Alternative Pathways Scholarship. Using a portion of my wealth, I created a fund specifically for entrepreneurs without traditional degrees, providing not just financial support but mentorship and networking opportunities to those whose brilliance might otherwise be overlooked by conventional systems. The first cohort of scholarship recipients reminds me so much of myself a decade ago. Brilliant, driven thinking, differently and too often dismissed by traditional gatekeepers. The young woman who developed an AI solution for dyslexic readers. The self-taught programmer from rural Appalachia, whose data visualization tools are being adopted by environmental scientists. The former service worker whose logistics algorithm is revolutionizing food delivery in urban food deserts. When I announced the scholarship, my parents' reaction was telling. My father immediately suggested partnering with his university's business school, missing the entire point of creating a path that exists outside traditional academic structures. But to his credit, when I explained my vision more clearly, he actually listened and eventually expressed genuine curiosity about the selection process. Small steps, but meaningful ones. My company continues to thrive, expanding into new security domains and recently opening a second office in Austin. Success brings its own challenges. More visibility means more scrutiny, more opportunities means more decisions about which paths to pursue. But these are good problems to have, challenges born of growth rather than limitation. My chosen family has expanded as well. Beyond Gabriella and my original startup colleagues, I've built connections with other entrepreneurs who understand the unique journey of building something from nothing. My Florida community has become a source of friendship and support. People who know me as I am now rather than who I used to be or who others expected me to become. My brother Adam visits regularly, enjoying the beach and the distance from family expectations. Our relationship has deepened as adults free from the comparative framework that defined our childhood. It's weird, and he told me during his last visit, watching mum and dad recalibrate their whole value system because of your success. You didn't just prove them wrong about you, you made them question everything they thought they knew about achievement. I don't know if my parents will ever fully understand the damage their narrow definition of success caused, or fully recognize the strength it took to forge my own path in the face of their constant disapproval. Some recognitions come too late to heal all wounds, but I no longer need their complete understanding to feel whole. What I've learned through this journey is that true validation can never come from external sources. Not from parents, not from academic institutions, not even from financial success. Real validation comes from building a life that aligns with your authentic self, from using your unique way of thinking as a strength rather than trying to conform to others' expectations. Success isn't measured by degrees on a wall or even numbers in a bank account. It's measured by the freedom to be fully yourself, to create meaningful work, to build connections based on mutual respect rather than conditional approval. For those of you watching who feel underestimated, misunderstood, or dismissed because you think differently, your unique perspective isn't a liability, it's your greatest asset. The same qualities that make you seem different in conventional settings may be exactly what allows you to see solutions and possibilities others miss. I'd love to hear your stories of forging unconventional paths or finding success in unexpected ways. Share your experiences in the comments below. Have you ever been underestimated by family or traditional institutions? How did you prove them wrong? Your stories might inspire someone else who's currently facing similar challenges. And if this story resonated with you, please hit the subscribe button and share it with someone who might need to hear that their different way of thinking is actually their superpower. Sometimes the most powerful words someone can hear are simply, "I see you, I value you exactly as you are." Thank you for joining me on this journey. Remember that the people who matter will love you for who you are, not what you achieve or how you achieve it. And those who can only value you conditionally aren't the ones whose approval you should be seeking. Until next time, this is Skylar signing off from my beach house that uneducated trash built.